Human beings have always been fascinated by violence. In fact, our curiosity with such events is primarily the reason why true crime as a genre arose to begin with, and the entertainment aspect of this form of media has contributed greatly to its expansion. In the US especially, shows like Tiger King and Dateline have become so popular that they are practically a part of American pop culture. Now, there is no doubt that the genre has garnered a huge community along the way. However, there are some questions as to whether it is ethical or not. Some people believe that the genre brings awareness to certain topics and thus should be viewed in a positive light, and others believe that it consistently disrespects the families of victims. However, I am here today to discuss that it is unethical because it perpetuates harmful myths surrounding crime and violence. Before we begin, what is true crime? According to the Oxford Learner's Dictionary, it is a type of genre that covers, examines, or tells the story of a real-life crime that took place. And while we often attribute this genre to solely podcasts and documentaries, it also applies to things like news and books. The genre is guilty of perpetuating three kinds of harmful myths. For one, it has a tendency to twist the facts of cases that it represents. Given that the number one goal of production teams is to make money, they are going to go through great lengths to ensure that their efforts aren't going to waste. So what this means, unfortunately, is that they are going to exploit people with mental health issues. And how this works is that their likeness is exploited for the sake of spicing things up. We see this when true crime documentaries use words like sociopath and psychotic in their titles to garner more of an audience. And because of this, people are more likely to perceive mentally ill folk as dangerous, despite there being evidence that these people are more likely to be victims of a crime than be the perpetrator of one, according to an article published by the American Psychological Association. In addition to this, producers of this genre continually perpetuate the myths surrounding who is more likely to be a victim of a crime. In an article published by the Columbia Journalism Review, media expert Kyle Pope found that a young white woman reported missing would get covered in 67 news stories compared to a middle-aged black man who would only get covered in 4 news stories at best. Additionally, Whitney Phillips, who is a professor at the University of Oregon School of Journalism and Communications, says that media outlets will often look for the right kind of victim to represent in their stories, and this leads them to only broadcast the stories of white women. And by placing the emphasis on a single kind of victim, they are sending the message that white women are the only groups deemed worthy of advocacy and protection. For example, out of the total 546,568 missing people in the US, black people count as 35% of this number, yet they only make up 13% of the US population. While white individuals almost make up for 60% of reported missing folk, it is important to acknowledge the racial bias that is present in the justice system. In this case, it is present when white people are more likely to be reported missing than black, indigenous people of color. Thus, the belief that white women are the primary targets of violence proves to be untrue, as one, they are in an elevated position in society where they are basically safe from violence, and 2, should that be the case, their cases will be prioritized above those of minorities. Thus, they shouldn't be scared really whatsoever. Even worse, white women contribute to the hysteria that they are someday going to be the victim of a crime by adhering to unbased rhetoric and making their own "if I go missing" files.
5 things in my "in case I go missing" binder. I added a hair sample just in case they need it for DNA testing. My friends and exes are the first people they need to bring in for questioning. This might be overboard, but I added clean fingerprints just in case there are latent prints they need to match.
While it is a very real fear that I understand as a woman for us to have, that we are someday going to be victims of violence, assuming that rich cis white women are the primary targets of this violence ignores the systemic oppression of minorities who are at far more risk than them. Lastly, the genre contributes heavily to the notion that the world is a much more dangerous place than it used to be. George Gerbner coined the term mean world syndrome, which is the belief that the world is a much more dangerous place than it is in real life. Even though crime is at an all-time low, according to Pew Research Center, people still assume, or consumers of this form of media still assume that the world is ridden with violence. Now on to objections. One objection to this stance could be that while media outlets may be guilty of twisting the facts in criminal cases, it is the job of the audience to be more critical of the content that they consume, arguing that the genre is simply another form of entertainment and not to be taken seriously. And this would be valid if the name of the genre was not true crime. If it is supposed to be treated as entertainment and not fact, there is no reason why it should be named so. Secondly, while we can agree that audiences should take responsibility for critiquing the media that they consume and should not take everything at face value, it is also the responsibility of the media to give accurate, unbiased information whenever possible, according to the Journalist Code of Ethics. Another opposing stance takes a different approach, stating that producers of true crime media are creating it with the goal of spreading awareness. However, the ways in which media outlets tend to sensationalize cases proves that they have other intentions. In addition, considering the Journalistic Code of Ethics, it is advised to avoid pandering to lurid curiosity, even if others do. With the production of recent shows such as Conversations with the Killer, the Ted Bundy tapes, and Making of a Murderer, there has been an influx of discussion and borderline obsession with these criminals, which can be attributed to the dramatic storytelling that journalists in this genre are guilty of doing. The genre appeals to lurid curiosity when they depict gruesome details, make docuseries on the lives of serial killers, and overall give unnecessary details that don't have any educational value to them. If this isn't bad enough, the fear of the other fuels misleading narratives about how crimes happen. In solely focusing on events where people were victims at the hands of strangers, creators of true crime media entertain this notion far too often by ignoring statistically likely cases. Consequently, misleading rhetoric is spread to the public, and this is basically counterproductive to true crime's goal of spreading awareness, because it often gets in the way of achieving justice for victims and even the accused. For example, the false notion that rape victims can't claim rape against someone that they know bleeds into the real world when audiences are called to review sexual assault cases as jurors. So today I've talked about how true crime is unethical because it perpetuates harmful myths surrounding violence and crime. The first being that it exploits the likeness of people with mental health issues. The second is that it perpetuates this myth that white women are the ultimate victims of society and the ones that are most targeted for harm doing. And the last being that it perpetuates this bias that the world is a much more dangerous place than it used to be. I hope you learned something. I'm not trying to advocate for people to not watch true crime just because I know how entertaining it is, and I myself tend to watch it. I just hope that this helps people become more aware of the media that they consume and just helps them critique it a little bit more when they are consuming it. Thank you.